It's season 7 of Radio Free 501c, the podcast of Rogue Tulips Consulting. We hit the 300 episode milestone this year, so don't forget to subscribe or follow us. We have a lot more to talk about. This week, I'm joined by returning guest and longtime friend, Jeff Cagna. He's here to talk with us about a really important topic, and that's the future of association boards. You may have been following his work the last year on this topic, and that's what we're diving into. It's October 27, 2025. Welcome to episode 304. It's Monday, October 27th. We're just a few days away from Halloween, what some people think is a scary day of the year. We're going to talk about a topic today that maybe is not scary, but it can be a little unsettling for associations and other nonprofits. We're going to talk about the future of association boards. But before we do that, hi, welcome. I'm your host, Cecilia Supp. This is this week's edition of Radio Free 501c, brought to you by Rogue Tulips Consulting. And to our global audience, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. And quick reminder, because I really want to get to this topic. If you haven't subscribed or followed us yet, please do so on your favorite service, because we are having so many great conversations. We're past the 300 episode mark, and we still have a lot to talk about. So I am here today welcoming back my friend and returning guest, Jeff Cagna, and he is here to talk about a project he's been working on for, I think, over a year now, the future of association boards. Jeff, welcome back. Would you like to say hello and tell us a little about yourself?
Well, thanks very much, Cecilia. Appreciate it. As you said, I'm Jeff Cagna, Executive Advisor for Foresight First LLC, and for the last over a year now, been serving as the curator and editor of the Future of Association Boards Community Dialogue. And before I continue, I want to not only congratulate you on reaching 300 episodes of the podcast. I was very happy to be part of the live podcast you did recently. But also I want to thank you for all of your contributions to the work on the FAB report that we're going to talk about in this episode. You've been one of our most consistent and important contributors, and so I'm grateful for your participation and very happy to have this opportunity to talk about the report and what's been happening and where we're going as we continue the work.
Thank you for saying that, Jeff. I appreciate it. And that live stream episode was fun. That was adventures and podcasting for me. It was my first one. So I was glad you could be there. Now, today is October 27th. It is 90 days since the report came out in late July. So since the report's come out, have you learned anything new or gotten different insights?
I think that, for me, even going into this project and throughout the project, and now that the report is out, it's always been a process of intentional learning. And I think that one of the things, we learned so much, as you know, through the work that we did throughout the last 12, 13 months on the project leading up to the release of the report. And this is a conversation that is in constant motion, not just in the association community, but in other sectors as well. So part of my ongoing learning is also paying attention to what's happening in other sectors. So, for example, one of the key reports that comes out every year comes from the consulting firm PwC. They do a survey of corporate directors. And among the questions that they ask on that survey of corporate directors, public company directors, is there anyone on your board who you think should be replaced? And for the last several years, about half of directors surveyed have said that at least one person on the board should be replaced. This year's report just came out in early October, and that number is now 55%. So the number is growing of directors in public companies who are saying that one of their peers should be replaced. So when you look at what's going on in corporate sector, corporate governance, in academic governance at universities, considering all the challenges the universities are facing, and governance in other sectors, including associations and nonprofits, I have a real concern. I said this in July, and my concerns have not diminished. In fact, they've increased. That what we are on the verge of, if we're not perhaps already there, is a kind of governance crisis in our institutions where we have maybe a mismatch between what boards are capable of doing and what boards are needed to do. And I think, and that's not a criticism of the people as much as it's a criticism of the overall system within which our boards, operate, and the expectations that have been set, but maybe not necessarily consistently fulfilled. So this is a truly a moment of truth, I think, for our organizations, our community, the important role that associations play in industries and professions and in society. We need to really think deeply about how our boards are going to move forward as we look toward these last few years of what I refer to as the turbulent 20s and ahead to the 2030s. This is the moment when decisive action is required, and that's why we have the report. And today we're going to also talk about the next step that I hope organizations will take.
Yes. And you and I have both been in this profession for, we'll just say, a couple of decades. So, and we've seen this growing issue, and it does seem to be worsening. And it's my opinion that it's because we get stuck in these ruts and we just keep doing the same thing over and over again and then complaining that it's not working, but then we keep doing it. And so I do sometimes hold the people accountable that are part of the systems because they keep the system going. Because we created the system, we can change the system, we can make it better, we can make it work. So that leads me to my next question about why is this report important to the association community? Because we are people who kind of tend to do the same thing over and over again. Is this going to help us change that?
So, as I answer that question, I just want to take a step back to make sure everyone who's listening and watching knows what we're talking about. So, and you set it up well in your introduction. We released the Future of Association Boards Community Dialogue Report. We call it the FAB report. That's Future of Association Boards abbreviated. And we released that in late July. And it contains 9 recommendations. And I'm sure I can provide you, Cecilia, with a link so people can download the report if they would like to look at it. So that's what we're talking about in terms of this report. And the 9 recommendations of the report are organized. 3 of them are for the association community. 3 of them are for boards themselves, for board presiding officers, and for directors. And then the third set of recommendations is for chief staff executives, senior staff, CXOs, and then other governing contributors, such as people who serve on committees and task forces. So one of the things that, really 3 things that I have been thinking about since the report came out. These really coalesced for me as I was working on the report and since I've been talking about it. I think the first thing that's important about the FAB report is that it challenges us to think about the issue of elevating board performance as a collective endeavor, right? So certainly boards themselves have a lot of heavy lifting to do, but they can't do it all on their own. They need support. And so we want to make sure that our process for doing this, and that's what's reflected in the report, is this idea that all stakeholders in our organizations need to lend their support to what the board is trying to do so they can all work together and actively contribute to elevating board performance. That's number one. I think, secondly, we are long overdue in our community. As you mentioned, you and I have been doing this for a while, been involved in associations for a long time, worked together back in the day at an association. And I think we're long overdue for an open and honest conversation about the extent to which our orthodox beliefs, the deep-seated assumptions we make about how the world works, have damaged the way boards function in our community. And I'm happy to talk about that as part of this conversation. But that's a big issue, is that we have not really reckoned with the extent to which orthodoxy has detrimentally affected the way boards operate. And then I think the final point here about why this is important for us to focus our attention on, why we should be thinking about the FAB report and its recommendations, is that typically what happens is we'll talk about something that we think should change about boards, and we don't agree on it. One person will say we should do this. No, someone says we should do that. And I think one of the things we learned through the process of putting together the FAB report, the work that you and so many others were involved in, is that we have to look at our divergent thinking as a source of learning that really energizes our effort to elevate board performance, rather than simply saying, well, I've got one view, someone else has a different view, someone else has a third view, and therefore it prevents us from moving forward because we cannot find a way to overcome the differences of opinion. This is a point at which I think we need to find ways to reconcile views, to not just give up because no one can agree, and instead recognize that thinking differently, that dissenting perspectives are important to getting to the right conversation about how our boards are going to be different. So, and that was reflected in our work. Like we never said to anyone in the process that they couldn't have a divergent view. And the report itself, if people go out and download it and read it, they will see that we've always said if people have a different perspective, we want to hear it because this is not about trying to get everyone to agree to the same thing. We've given recommendations, but we want to get people to be talking about how to move forward. And that is not about trying to put everyone into the same idea. It's about trying to open the space for the conversations that are required as those 9 recommendations outlined. So those would be the 3 most important things that I think really reflect why this report and the work we've done on it is important to our community and will continue to be as we move into 2026.
Yes, and as you mentioned, I was a part of a lot of the conversations in the community that you built to help support the creation of this report. And we did have a lot of differing opinions. And what I see is, as you just very stated, well, I should say stated very well stated, I guess is where I was going with that. But the point being, we did not have 100% consensus, nor should we have 100% consensus, because then we're just going to end up right back where we are now. And I think one of the distractions in trying to move forward with improving board performance and how we do this work is that everybody thinks there's one solution for everybody. And there isn't, but we also get distracted by people pointing out the exception to the rule. Now, there are certain things that I think we can all look at and say, well, I need to do this for my organization, but in the way that works for us, instead of us saying, well, that's not going to work because my association is different. And as you know, I do a lot of facilitating education for people getting ready for the CAE exam. Mm-hmm. And I confront that kind of thinking a lot. Well, at my association, we do it this way, but when you're getting ready for that exam, you have to think big, you have to think strategic and broad. And it's not about your association. So if we want to move forward as a profession and supporting our boards to do better and to help them get an experience, what I don't like, and I don't think we talked about it too terribly in depth, but what I don't like about the board experience is a lot of times I don't think they have a valuable experience as a board member because of the frustration of these 9 orthodoxies that we all believe and keep following. So, but before we dive more into that, Jeff, could you quickly explain to the audience what an orthodoxy is, just in case they have not seen your paper?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been talking about Orthodox beliefs for a long time. It's hard for me to pinpoint when it started. And as I've said on many occasions, I never really imagined when I began talking about Orthodoxy that it would be such an important part of what I do. But actually, it's now become the toughest conversation that I have with boards because Orthodox beliefs, as I said earlier, the deep-seated assumptions we make about how the world works, those beliefs reflect the organization as it has been in the past and has been carried forward over many years and decades. So, as I say to boards all the time, boards aren't to blame for the existence of orthodox beliefs inside their organizations, but they are responsible for addressing them. And let me give you an example of an orthodox belief that I think relates to what you were just discussing, Cecilia, and is a very important one to this conversation, and it's in the FAB report. You can find that on page 7 of the FAB report. It's orthodox belief number 3: association boards can always choose what they want to do. Is an orthodox belief, and what is written in the report here, and I'm just going to read it directly so that we're very clear. The response to that: board agency includes neither rejecting fiduciary and risk-related responsibilities, nor engaging in the operational management of the association, right? So there is this belief, and I've seen it, as I'm sure you have too. I've seen it as an advisor to boards. I've seen it as a board member, right? I've seen it as a board officer, over the course of these years, where there is a belief among some. It's like, well, we can just do what we want to do. We can kind of pick and choose, and it's not true, right? It's an orthodoxy that exists out there that I think gives some boards a rationalization for why they don't want to take on certain difficult questions or decisions, and instead say, well, we're just going to choose the things that we like to do. You don't get to release or let go of your fiduciary responsibility. You don't get to let go of your risk-related responsibilities. You don't get to all of a sudden decide that you think you know better than the staff about how to run the association. Those are not things that you get to do just because you're on the board. So this idea that boards can always choose what they want to do and then just ignore or not do things that don't please them or make them unhappy, that's an orthodoxy that exists, but it's not one that we can permit to continue, because it's that one alone, and there are many other orthodoxies in the report. We have 9 recommendations, each one with 3 orthodoxies associated with it. So you do the math, and that's just scratching the surface. And I think it's really important, the bigger sort of reflection on that for your viewers is to say, look at each one of these orthodox beliefs in the report and think about the extent to which that orthodoxy is influencing what's happening within your board. And whether or not you're a board member, or if you're a staff partner, or if you're the chief staff executive, whatever role you play, look at those orthodoxies and say, you know what? I see this happening in our board. And maybe I've been a part of the problem as well, like taking personal responsibility for orthodoxy, for perpetuating it, is important to this process. So look at them, reflect on them, and then ask the question, what can I do to help address these orthodox beliefs so we can move past them? We have to think and act beyond them. That's a very important habit of mind for us to develop. And I think that if we can do that, then we can, everyone can contribute to making progress to get beyond the orthodoxies to better ways of thinking that will allow our boards to move forward.
Yes. And yes, well said. I think we do have to look at our contribution to these orthodoxies, because how many of us have said that's just the way boards are? There's nothing we can do about it. I think the worst orthodoxy is that's the way we've always done it. As
Yeah, I think that one may be among the master orthodoxies of them all.
it's the monster, it's the mothership of orthodoxies, I think, because I am always disappointed that we have allowed a mindset among boards, and not just one specific board, but across the board with boards, that there is some sort of privileged class that they can just do whatever they want, as if there's some level of aristocracy. And because I have stepped into this role, I can just wreak havoc, or not wreak havoc, but not really contribute, or just totally take us off the strategic plan because I've gotten distracted by what we all like to call the bright, shiny thing. And trying to turn the ship around is difficult. But like you, I do believe it can be done, but we need to keep having these kind of conversations about why are we doing this? What's that deep held orthodoxy? What are we all doing to contribute to this? And like I often joke around, people like you and I, consultants, we have work because people do need that objective third party viewpoint of what's going on, because we're too close to it ourselves. So I always like to ask other people for advice because I'm too close to my situation. I need to get some other input. And it usually helps me realize, well, maybe I am going in the wrong direction, or it will confirm I am going in the right direction. But I do think overall, we need to come together as the not just the community of nonprofits, but the profession of nonprofit management, and say we have experience, we have expertise, we have knowledge for a reason, and we're trying to guide you and support you and help you. We're not trying to tell you what to do. And I think a lot of times building that kind of better communication and better relationship is helpful. It's very difficult though, and I'd love to hear some more of your thoughts on this, trying to conduct consistent, in-depth board education, because we all kind of default to that. We need board education, but how do we make that happen?
Yeah. Well, it's a challenge, and it's something that I'm involved in trying to do as well. And I think that, I think in some ways the report, the FAB report, is an opportunity to put to prioritize learning for all stakeholders in the process, right? So the intention behind the report, the way it's structured, to your point, it doesn't prescribe this is what you absolutely should do. It gives recommendations. It describes the issues that are involved. It articulates the challenge and then suggests, recommends the direction in which to go, and is supported by the orthodox beliefs and is supported by related questions, which are, intended to promote intentional learning among those who are involved, who are serving on boards and the chief staff executive and others who are part of these very important conversations. So in some ways, I hope that people will look at the report and say, okay, there's actually a lot of learning that is embedded in the way this report is constructed, because my hope is that is reflected, because that's really what our process was about, was a learning process, involving lots of people in our conversations, using a variety of tools to have that, having consistent LinkedIn, discussions and polling and gathering information, doing our monthly Zoom meetings and having other, steps in the process that we undertook. Trying to do all that work was a learning oriented process. And I think it's led to a learning oriented report, rather than a report, and to your point, in which we sort of say, you must do this. We certainly encourage people, challenge people to move forward, but we also want to recognize that, as we've discussed, there is a need for dialogue. There is a need for collaborative effort to make this happen. We can't expect, boards can't carry this burden entirely on their own. They need help to make that happen. And we want to be sure that everyone who has a role to play in this feels able to do that, right? And is in a position to make the most significant contribution that they can. Because really, if we persist in the idea that our disagreement is going to be an obstacle, then we will never, ever make any progress on this, or it'll require a far more significant effort and a much greater burden for a small number of people to try to see it through, right? And instead, here it's about distributing the responsibility, and ensuring that everyone who has a voice in this can contribute to moving it in the right direction. So it's a more, perhaps a more challenging process, because you're going to have a lot of voices involved. But I think it's the right process for our community to be following, because it's consistent with what associations, particularly have always been about, right? It's about bringing people together to solve problems. And in this case, it's about, I think, finding solidarity and finding unity of purpose to try to move this particular very difficult problem forward. And the difficult problem I'm describing is elevating board performance. How can we make sure that that is truly a collaborative endeavor with all these different stakeholders having a role to play in helping try to solve it and move things in the right direction?
Yeah. So yes, and I think we can do that. And another, I guess, discouragement or disappointment I have is when I hear other people in the community and the profession say, "Oh no, we can't change it. It's not going to happen. It's just the way it is." And I'm not a believer in that. I never have been. And I see a couple of cultural things that are just part of what we do right now. I don't think it always will be. I think it's shifting. I do think very slowly it's changing. And that's looking at the board as like a House of Representatives,
Mm.
or looking at the board as a reward for long-term commitment as a volunteer to the organization. I know you're doing a lot of work also in the area of fit for purpose boards.
Mhm.
And those are two things that I think will fall away if we focus more on fit for purpose boards. So do you think that is a way that we can help us all improve those ways of doing things, the ways we pick people, the way we train them, how the board performs?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think about what you said at almost the beginning of our conversation about the experience,
Mhm.
and that's something that I wrote about. It's now going on 8 years. Back in 2018, where I wrote an article for Associations Now on designing the director experience, which really challenges us. And I'm mentioning it because it sort of brought me to the place of talking about and writing about fit for purpose boards. Because back at that time, to your point earlier, what I was seeing, and I'm still seeing it now, unfortunately, but it's definitely an issue, is are we doing enough at the very beginning of the process, looking at the entire process as part of the experience from the moment that we say we need to find people to serve on the board, and who are we identifying, and who are we, vetting, and who are we recruiting, and who are we evaluating and ultimately selecting. The entire process from that starting point all the way through board service and all the way to people's retirement from the board is part of a director experience, right? And how are we intentionally going about creating the best possible experience for people so that we're not setting up the expectation that we're seating them in a legislative body, or that we're giving them make work, or that we're giving them absolute authority, right? Like that continuum that we were talking about earlier between someone who comes in and sort of upsets the entire balance of the system that the board is, to those who simply sit there and don't really contribute anything and are end up not really being an important player in how the board conducts its work. That those extremes can't be accepted any longer. We need to be able to put people in a space where they are important and valuable contributors within what is essentially a stable system of regulating what happens within the organization, the human system that navigates the organization through the challenges of this environment. And that's what brings us to the idea of fit for purpose boards, because we need people at the board table who are ready to do that, right? Like I've written recently and will continue to write, it's not going to get any easier, right? We're moving into the last 4 years of this decade very soon, and 2030s are on the horizon, and the acceleration and intensification of the issues that we've been experiencing in the 2020s is set to be what happens next. These next 4 years are going to be challenging. The 2030s will be challenging. So boards are going to have to rise to the occasion. That's why being very intentional about what constitutes a fit for purpose board, fit for purpose directors, fit for purpose officers, and also other contributors who also have to elevate their contribution to what's happening. It has to be, again, a comprehensive, holistic view around the way we look at what it means to serve on the board and what boards are asked to do, what the purpose is, what the work is, and how we compose them. All of those issues go into the idea of a director experience that should lead to the creation of a fit for purpose board. So we have to bring a much higher level of intention to this consistently across our community. There are organizations that are doing that, but it's just not widespread enough in my view. And what we hear most about are the shortcomings and the challenges. And that's what we have to rectify, is find ways to solve those problems across the entire community. That's why the FAB report, has these three different sections: what's important for the entire community, what's important for boards and those who serve on them, what's important for staff partners, chief staff executives, and others who are working with them. Everyone's got a role to play in making this happen. And the report is a framework really for moving that forward.
Well, and I also hope that this report over the next few years will influence the other areas of our governance structures, like our chapters or any affiliate agreements we may have, how we run committees. I've seen over the last few years a lot of organizations reevaluating their committee structure and what do they do and how do they contribute. So I think a leadership role in an association is a leadership role. It's what level you're at. We're starting with the board here in this report because they are the top tier of the leadership. They're the ones who are making a lot of the decisions and setting the direction for the future. But there's a lot of things in this report that I think other volunteer leaders could learn from and apply. And especially if you have a chapter system where you have local boards of directors, they could also learn from this and let go of some of those orthodoxies. Now, I am not going to ask you what is your favorite orthodoxy, because I know you would like to see us let go of most of them. But is there one orthodoxy that you would like to see go away? Like if you could snap your fingers and say, well, I can get this one off the list. Is there one you would do that?
There's a lot more than one, but for the purposes of this conversation, I'll focus in on one because I think in many ways it's the one that if we could really address this comprehensively, it would make such a huge difference. And it is that association board service is a volunteer role.
Mhm.
And I've been talking about this for a very long time. No one ends up on an association board as an accident, right? It's always a matter of choice, not chance. So this idea that someone is a volunteer when they're serving on a board, besides other reasons, which we won't get into right now, there are other reasons why it's untrue. So board service for an association is voluntary. It's chosen by those who serve and repeatedly, right? Oftentimes, depending on the method of composition, people
Mhm.
may get asked two, three, four times, do you still want to do this? Are you still ready to serve? And people say yes over and over again, which is what gets them at the table, right? It's a series of yeses by everyone involved that gets you to the table. And so you can't stop saying yes when you get to the board table because it's now inconvenient or less important than other things. And so this idea that someone is there, be there out of the goodness of their heart, volunteering kind of thing, no, it's a choice. I've served, you've served, right? And serving in this capacity is a choice you make every day and requires a daily commitment and a daily recommitment, maybe, to that service. And if you can't do it, if someone can't serve on a board at the level that is required, there is a remedy, and that is they don't have to, right? They can move to something else. And that's not a criticism, not trying to make anyone feel bad. It's just saying if I don't have the wherewithal to be able to do it, then I should not sit in this seat. I should remove myself and allow someone else who does have that wherewithal to do it, and then we'll find another way for me to contribute if I'm that person. So I just think that, if we could shift the community-wide perspective, because I still hear people saying it, right? Well, they're just volunteers, right? And it's used as a rationalization, as an excuse. And we've got to stop believing it. We've got to stop saying it. It's not the same thing as saying, "Hey, I want to volunteer for the marketing committee." Like that's a different situation. I want to volunteer to be on, the annual meeting review thing. Like those things are volunteer opportunities, and that's fine. But that's not what it means to be on a board, right? And the other thing that I sort of said we wouldn't talk about, what I was mentioning quickly, is those other volunteer roles do not carry with them fiduciary responsibility, right? And that is a key difference for why we can't really call board members, directors, and officers volunteers because they've got a much higher level of responsibility than anyone else who serves in a role for which they are not compensated, let's say. So this is a voluntary thing that people are doing when they're choosing to be on a board. And that voluntary choice involves a commitment to do it at the highest possible level, and that's what this report is about. It's a respected choice, and it's a choice that everyone wants people to make, but only if it accompanying it is a commitment to do it at the highest possible level, which is what's required for our organizations today. We can't get away from what's happening in the environment, and boards don't get to choose what they want to do and don't want to do because the world is demanding something more of them.
Yes, well, I really do like that. I think I've always thought that about as a voluntary role as opposed to a volunteer role, but like everybody, I fall into those lazy speaking habits of they're a volunteer leader because that's how we talk to each other. It's a different level. I agree with you 100% on that, though. It's a voluntary role, but it does have a higher level of responsibility and accountability, which we don't often talk about the accountability of volunteer leaders, especially at the board level, but at any level. Because if you've committed to be on a committee, you've made a commitment and you have a responsibility to do that work as well. And that's why a lot of times we look to volunteers who are in a committee or a chapter or some other work group or task force as potential leaders for the future because we see how they perform there. It's almost like a testing ground. Like, how do they do? Do they show up? Do they take it seriously? But that board level fiduciary role is very different, very demanding. And I think that pointing that out is going to be really helpful to people listening to this or reading the report in the future or talking with you in the future in other ways. I have two more questions for you before we wrap up this episode. Do you think there is a role or a place or an opportunity to do some training about emotional intelligence for our boards? And the reason I'm asking this question is because over the years, many of the times where I see problems come up, it's related to relationships and it's related to people getting very personally involved and maybe taking offense at things and focusing on the tension in the relationships instead of the resolution of that tension towards putting that energy back into the work that needs to be done. So, do you think there is a place for us to do some of that kind of training, whether we call it relationship management or emotional intelligence?
Well, I think a part of the idea of director experience, that I mentioned earlier is, I think, trying to ensure that, um, you know, even before people are considered for the board,
Mhm.
that we're trying to help develop people in the ways that they need to be developed so that they'll be ready for board service, like the board development. And we shouldn't just be limiting that to those that we have sort of nominally identified as leaders, quote unquote, but instead trying to help everyone. I think, especially in the world of more AI, one of the things we need to do is really help everyone develop their enduring human skills and networks, right? So, and all of that's important because the enduring human skills, like sort of emotional self-regulation and empathy and benevolence and compassion and communication, creativity, all these enduring human skills are going to be important for us no matter what we do in a world in which technology is becoming so pervasive and it already is and will continue to go down that pathway. And then the networks piece is really about helping people build those relationships with others because the skills may shift in emphasis and they'll need to be developed and refined, but the networks are and that's something that people will need in whatever work they do, including board service. But the networks part of it is really about the relationships that people have themselves with other people, and how can they begin to build that? And that's something that is also a part of the board service, experience is that they are building relationships with their peers on the board. So I think there's a lot we can do, and part of what the report contains is next practices. They're sort of at the end of the report, and a lot of those next practices are about how can we help our boards be more productive, for example, in saying in bringing dissent in as an intentional resource, right? Intentional learning resource, so that rather than fearing the idea that people will disagree, is to create an environment in which people understand that dissent is necessary, right? It's not even tolerated; it is essential to making good decisions. That we don't want to put whatever number 12 or 15 or whatever number of people around the table as a board and then expect that they're just all going to nod their heads all the time, right? Like the whole idea is to have a group of people who bring a whole set of human capabilities, a whole set of enduring human skills and humanity in its own right to the table, and that there will be disagreement, there will be dissent, but it's not personal. It's about having the right conversation and making sure that conversation is fully formed. We're considering all of the implications of that. So there's a lot more to talk about, in that regard. But I think that we can do a lot more to help our people build the capacity they need for board service in a whole variety of ways, and do that well before the time begins when they actually need it, because it's going to help them in whatever they do in life, personally, whatever they do professionally, and it will help them when they begin doing, engaging at that level of a board contribution.
Yeah. So I love that you pointed that out. Dissent is necessary because tension is not bad. Tension is what holds things together. And if we don't challenge those ideas, we're not going to have the best idea. So I agree with that wholeheartedly. I talk about that a lot with people. So before we wrap up this episode, you have an announcement you're going to make today. And because, as we said at the top of the the episode, this is 90 days since the report's been released. So, what is your big announcement for today?
Well, the announcement that I'm making today, really on behalf of the Fab Community Dialogue, the entire group. One of the things that you asked me earlier, what have I learned? And one of the things we've learned is that people, our colleagues across the community, board members, chief staff executives, everyone who's involved in this, are looking for some guidance on how to move forward with the recommendations of the FAB reports. So what I'm announcing today is that on November 13th, which is Thursday, November 13th, we are having our FAB report at 90 days webinar. I realize will be beyond the 90-day mark, but the scheduling thing, so it was the best possible date we could come up with. But on Thursday, November 19th at 2 o'clock Eastern time, we will have our FAB report at 90 days webinar. And during that webinar, we will release the FAB report action plan for everyone in the community to use. It's not the only pathway that associations can move forward, but it is, I think, the most logical pathway, a good pathway for organizations to follow, and it organizes the 9 recommendations in an order that makes sense for implementation for our organizations and provides a little bit of guidance for doing that. So I encourage everyone to register for the webinar on Thursday, November 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll make sure that there's a link that you can access for that. And I encourage you to do that so that you can get a copy of the action report, which we will share at the time of the webinar. And so that's the announcement. And I'm very happy that working with my partner on this remembers that they are helping out with making sure the action plan is going to be accessible to everyone. And so yes, please sign up for the webinar, and please get the action plan when we do it on November 13th.
Oh, that's excellent. And an action plan is a starting point. I want to mention this to the audience. You don't have to follow it to the letter, but it's going to give you some guidance on what you can do at your organization. So this will be a very useful tool. And again, I do want to endorse what we call the FAB report. It is short for Future of Association Boards, but it is also a fabulous report with a lot of good info in it. So it is fab on both levels. Jeff, you've been a guest before, so as we wrap up the episode, I like to ask, what's the one thought you would like the audience to take away today, and how can they get in touch with you? Because I'm sure they're going to want to ask you some more questions about this project.
Well, the second part is easy. You can email me at jeff@foresightfirst.io, so that's easy enough to do. I suppose that, I think we've talked about it in a variety of ways, but I want to make it explicit, for people who maybe are skeptical that this is important, or think there are other priorities. I don't think it's possible to overstate the importance of acting to try to build the strongest possible boards for the future of our community, and that starts today. We're not going to be able to really offer our organizations the kind of stewardship they need going into this very difficult time, in a difficult time now, but the difficult time still ahead, unless we start taking this seriously. And the question that I always, ask every board, what will our successors say about us, is ringing in my ears as I say this, because this is really it's about us today, but it's really about those who will follow us, who are counting on us to ensure that our boards are in the strongest possible position long before they arrive on the scene. And it's really critical that we have those voices of our successors who currently are not in our boardrooms, and they're currently not sitting in our committee meetings, and they're not currently really necessarily influencing what's happening in our organizations, but their voices need to be heard at every level of our organization, because they are the ones who will inherit what we leave behind. And it's really important for us to be looking at the FAB report and its recommendations and saying, what can we do to move this conversation forward? A lot of great effort has gone on to the creation of this report. And I'm not speaking about myself. I'm speaking about the more than 350 contributors who were involved actively in the work of the report. We've been working over the last year. Their efforts, our collective efforts, merit the attention of our community. And I certainly hope that everyone who's listening to this, watching this, will download a copy of the report and review it and join us for the webinar on November 13th to get the action plan so that we can build further momentum for shifting the future of our boards toward the future and away from a past that we're never going to recapture and is not going to serve us as we move into the 2030s.
And yes, oh gosh, yes, I hope that happens. I'm just sitting here nodding my head. If you're listening and not watching, I'm nodding in agreement with all of that, because it's what we are leaving this for the next group of people, the next generation, however you want to describe it. So I think that's very forward-looking, very foresight-ish approach to things. And I know we're all working more on that. So Jeff, thank you for joining me. As you mentioned, I have been part of this working group. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about the report here, and again for all of your contributions. And I look forward to our continued collaboration on this as our project moves forward.
Great. And I want to thank Jeff again for joining me. As I mentioned, he's a returning guest, and we always have a great conversation. So I highly encourage you, if you haven't seen this report, get a copy. Jeff, can you share the link to the website here as we're wrapping up?
The simplest way to get it is to go to fabreport.online. There are other links, other places, but I realized when I started doing interviews, I needed a simple way to say it, and I can't give you one with lots of slashes and dashes. So fabreport.online would be the place to find the report.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I know we in the FAB community group have been helping Jeff distribute this paper to other organizations outside of ASAE and Association Forum. We've been reaching out to other groups like the Nonprofit Alliance and the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance. So we're really trying to spread the word. So get your copy, read it, and help spread the word at your own organization. But we have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next time with another exciting episode. So a quick reminder, don't forget to follow or subscribe if you haven't already, because you don't want to miss any of these conversations. As I said, over 300 episodes, and we still have a lot to talk about. If you'd like to find this episode with Jeff so you can share it with your friends, go to our website, roguetulips.com, and go to our podcast page. It's very easy to find. And you can look at our library and see what other episodes we have and what great conversations are out there. If you want to see what's on my mind this week, because you never know what the heck I'm going to talk about, check out the blog page. If you're looking for ethics education, we'll be offering our ethics course through December, and then we'll be back in 2026 with a revised content for that ethics course. Check out the education page for that. And if you'd like to work with Rogue Tulips Consulting and see how we can help your organization bloom outside the box, check out the services page. Always happy to have a conversation. So thanks for joining us, everyone. And on behalf of Jeff and myself, we'll see you next time. That's it for this week. I hope you really loved this episode as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Learn more about how our experience and knowledge at Rogue Tulips can give your organization the strategic edge to reach its goals. Check out our website at roguetulips.com. We'd love to talk with you and see how we can work together. Thanks.